Welcome to What We Watch, Doing OK's entertainment podcast. Each week we have 3 topics of pop culture awesomeness. We break down those 3 topics into 3 separate videos over on this channel. Then in theory, we put them all together into an audio podcast at the end of the week. Let's get into our topic. Hi, I'm Dan.
I'm Olga, and today we are talking about the 10 best shows with the 10 worst pilots.
Yeah. So these are shows that we have come to know as being quality programs, but you wouldn't quite know it by watching their first episode.
You might have stopped there unless people really harassed you.
This topic is inspired by the fact that I recently watched the pilot for Titans, which is an awful pilot, in my opinion.
I got up and walked away. I don't do that, and I did that.
And I watched a few more episodes, liked them a lot more. So I was like, what are other shows that are, have a little bit of a rough start, right? And a lot of the time I think about these shows as far as like, man, these are hard shows to recommend to people because they'll put on that first episode and go, what the hell is this person telling me to watch?
Why is this person my friend? I don't trust their judgment. How did they get this far in life? Right. Are we being hyperbolic enough, Dan?
Why don't we start with Doctor Who? You were the one who wanted to put this on. So this is the reboot with I can't say his name. What's
Eccleston. I think. It's been a while since I said his name. The Ninth Doctor. So yeah, this was back in, I think, 2005. Everyone was so excited. Well, not everyone. The point is that even though he was around for only one season, people fell in love with this guy and people fell in love with the show again. It brought a new generation of Whovians into being. And I mean, it was a big deal. The show hasn't been off the air since it got rebooted. Yeah. So why did we care so much?
So there's a couple shows in this list that because of their first few episodes, I really struggled to get myself into the show. Yeah. And I'd say to a certain degree, a running theme is overly childishness, overly ham-fisted dialogue or cheesiness. And that sometimes it takes a while, for them as writers to find the right level of cheese, but also for you as an audience member to sort of calibrate yourself to what the show is. I think the first episode is just so sort of goofy while trying to not be that it's...
I'm trying not to factor in the fact of like, I was an older teenager watching it and it was a kid show, quote unquote. Because the later seasons kind of walk away from that in a lot of ways. They're still family friendly, but the idea of Doctor Who is for kids. Yeah. You see that more in that first episode where they're trying to figure out how to transition from that.
Well, and I think they don't really know exactly what their new audience is going to be yet, right?
And the villain was living rubber. Like, what?
Yeah.
How did I get past that?
I wouldn't be shocked if people were didn't agree with us on this particular one.
Fine.
I'm sure people have. In general, there will be things people disagree with us on this list.
Which is why I was joking about being hyperbolic about them being god awful. They're not. There was something charming there.
There's definitely something that. But you see a kernel of something. And I think there is a good performance there from Eccleston.
That's true. Yeah. And Billy Piper.
Yeah, she's fine.
Sure.
I mean, she gets better, I think.
Yeah. You like her. Yeah. I liked her enough. Yeah. But even so, not the best episode.
Yeah. I'm going to sort of group these two together, even though they are 2 different on our number scale.
Whoa.
The Office...
You didn't actually rank these.
No,
so.
But I wrote down 10. The Office and Parks and Rec, I think, are both very indicative of how pilots, especially for sitcoms, are usually not great. It's hard to get it right because... sitcoms, what really makes them work is once you know the characters well, you know how the actors play to them, and you know what, connections and how they bounce off of each other and how to write for this cast. Yeah. And so I think it's hard to make that work. What do you feel about these two?
So I tried The Office several times and I couldn't get through season 1. Yeah. And that's kind of my feeling about like Parks too. Yeah. I think they both in a way struggle of like The Office was an adaptation of the British Office and it had the weight on its shoulders of that. Yeah. And then Parks was trying to not be The Office, but get that audience.
I mean, it started as an Office spinoff.
Right.
And even though they changed from that, people still like knew it as, that show that's supposed to be like The Office.
And so in a way, I almost like can't blame their pilots on what they were, because they had to serve not just the master of learn our characters, learn our world, but also this might be familiar to you, and we want it to be a comforting familiarity.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that the Office pilot is like almost a shot for shot remake of the British one.
Yeah.
And that in some ways is why I think it's one of the worst ones, one of the worst pilots, because it's not becoming its own identity.
Yeah.
And it's not really trying to do its own thing. And I think that everybody's a little stiff. Nobody is exactly who they turn out to be. And it lacks the charisma or the likability factor, which is what makes the American Office stand on its own 2 feet as a separate entity.
And for me, the Parks pilot, it lacks the heart that I associate with the show.
Yeah.
Like, I've rewatched that show so many times because I just love the people in it, and there wasn't a lot of that heart.
It's like dreary.
There. Yeah,
it's like depressing. Yeah, it's not a
totally different tonally.
Yeah, doesn't work. No, and even Leslie, I don't feel like
it's not the same Leslie. Nope.
They hadn't figured her out yet. Yeah. So those are my feelings about those two, and sort of a similar but different thing. Let's talk about Bojack, because that's again another comedy. That sometimes comedies sometimes take a little bit longer to figure out their identity.
Yes. So you've only seen that episode of Bojack.
Yeah, it's the only episode of Bojack I've seen.
And I'm fully caught up on it, but at this point, I've rewatched the show quite a few times, and I make myself watch season 1 because it has kernels of it. It's just, again, it struggles with the pressure of learn the characters, learn the world, and he is like unlikable. And that is the character. So when you have an unlikable character and they're a jerk and you don't know why you're supposed to care about them, again, how do you work your way through that?
And I think on top of it all, I just don't think it was particularly funny.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing is like, I believe you, Bojack gets better, and eventually I will get back to it.
I'll make you.
but yeah, I mean, if I had never heard anything about the show and I just watched that episode, I don't think that pilot's awful or anything. You know, we are being hyperbolic, but it was fine. But there was nothing about it that made me go, oh, I need to watch more.
And where's the critical praise coming from? Like, it is a comedy, but it's a dark comedy, and you just have like a sarcastic asshole there. That's not dark comedy. That's just a not pleasant person who you think is supposed to be funny, but they're not.
Yeah, it's one thing if there's been plenty of comedies and things with unlikable characters, but the level of humor to unlikability has to find the right balance.
And sometimes the foils don't work. Like the foils to that character, they have to also be likable, and you don't always like their shtick.
Yeah. What do I got next for you, babe? Let's talk about Glow. So you didn't necessarily agree with me on this one. I found the Glow premiere to be, it's not terrible. It's just nowhere near as good as the show gets to be. And I mean, obviously, they learn, it goes up from there, but I don't think it's a great indication of why we love I mean, in some ways, it's very similar to Parks for me, where I'm like, Glow is great because it has this amazing cast that binds together and is a family, and it has so much heart, and it makes you care so much about the silliness of the world and everything.
Yeah.
And this first episode, I find the main character very unlikable. I find it very whiny and dreary and dark and sad.
Yeah.
And that is not I mean, obviously that sets up like, oh, she's down and out, and she finds what comes
the
better.
Growth, yeah.
But like, it's not just that she's down and out; it's that she's a fucking asshole, and like.
But she's also self-righteous.
Yeah.
So this is different in a way. It actually kind of reminds me of BoJack, where it's like, oh, the person isn't being nice; they're not making good choices, but they're also like. They don't care that they're bad choices. Like, she thinks she's in the right.
Yeah.
Like, she has this like moral. Like false morality.
Well,
almost.
I mean, she doesn't think she's in the right with sleeping
with all of the with everything.
But she has such a pity party for herself.
Yeah,
and that's hard to deal with the amount of pity party when she's done crappy things. Yeah. And again, she's an anti-hero character, and I think the way they handled that in the long run worked out okay. But it's just it starts off feeling like, oh, this is going to be one of those sitcoms or whatever where you are supposed to hate everyone, and that is just not
not like we fell in love with everybody basically, and And it's hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel. It's not even the end of the tunnel. It's like 3 episodes later.
Yeah. Like, I don't enjoy watching that episode. And I also, like, my sister watched, I think, like the first few, and she's like, I don't know, it felt kind of meh. And I don't blame her.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah. Let's talk about one that I struggled to get you to watch, which is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy has
a difficult one.
Buffy has the added bonus factor of being an older show, right?
Yeah.
So it's from a different time, and that's, it's hard to get over even simple things like some of the dialogue vernacular, some of the clothing choices, the really bad effects. I
mean, we started with Doctor Who. Yeah, that was later on, and those effects god awful. To me, it wasn't like, that's almost more forgivable if you know that you're watching an old show.
Yeah.
But
I think the thing about season one of Buffy is that it's the prime example of, it's so hard to recommend people to watch this, because when they watch those first few episodes, they're like, this is supposed to be a great show.
This is the thing that people watch like 20 something years later.
Yeah.
How did this have cultural resonance? Yeah. Like, that's genuinely how I felt. I was just like, clothing and effects, whatever. Yes, the dialogue, the way they built characters.
Yeah.
Trying to like Buffy. A lot of this comes down to the likability of the lead.
Yeah.
But not just, it's like trying to see her as capable of the promise of like, she's a badass. Yeah. So if anything, the difficulty with the Buffy pilot is knowing the acclaim and the cultural resonance and why people look up and love this look up to and love this character.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we get from point A to point B with this person?
Well, I think it's a lot like Doctor Who in that it's very hard to acclimate yourself to what the tone is trying to be. And I think the pilot for Buffy also is under the weight of, let's get a ton of exposition about what this ridiculous world is at once. And so it just feels, it's hard. And I almost like, it's almost in some ways impossible for them to have fully achieved what the show is in that first episode, as far as like getting you to realize, oh yes, there is absurdity and silliness, but it's grounded in very real human stuff. Because you can't really jump into the real human stuff right off the gate.
No.
But like, it just comes off very farcical, whereas eventually, you get to realize that there is groundedness in this. There is actual darkness and actual human emotion, and that's what drives the show, that you care about these people. And I don't think that I don't think they do a universally terrible job. I think most of the actors are fine.
I would say that's something that's pretty good about it, is like the actors pull off their characters. Yeah. It's just, you don't necessarily want to watch the characters as they're put. And again, not just talking about Buffy herself, but even like Giles wasn't the best.
He was fine, and it's like, obviously, Charisma Carpenter, Cordelia, is, just very stereotypical at that point, because you haven't seen her in any way develop.
Stereotypical mean girl, and it's like, another show like this.
Yeah, I think they do an okay job introducing Angel, an okay job with Willow, and Xander is fun, but I think overall it really, in some ways, at least for me, watching it years after it came out, and you even after that, it's like, it's hard to get over the monsters and the effects and the fight scenes and stuff to not feel like Power Rangers or something, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's like, here in the first episode, it's like, here are a bunch of stereotypical characters fighting a bunch of silly looking monsters, and that is,
and we love it.
They didn't have the. They had spent so much time setting up what the show, what the world is, that they didn't have time to really establish like a real human center to it. A similar show I have here is Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is another one where I was like, the first few times I watched the first few episodes, I was like, this really feels like a kid's show. Like, I don't know that like I can get into this, because again, I watched this after I watched this in college.
Yeah.
And I knew so many people loved it, and I wanted to give it a chance, because obviously like the animation's cool. I've heard so many great things.
The promise it has is it's a kid show, not just for kids.
Yeah, it's a family, it's one of the good ones.
It has themes that will resonate with older audiences as well.
Yeah. And I'd say that there is some of that in there from early on, but I found Aang very hard to watch. Like, I just found him annoying and very much like a kid character, right? Something that's like, oh, a little kid would love this, but you're just being a little too goofy. It didn't show me
its potential.
Yeah. I'd say even something like, if you look at, shows they've done since then, as far as like Korra or Dragon Prince, you come
those
away.
Those hit the ground running.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say those episodes are like fantastic pilots, but you come away knowing it's not just a kid's show.
And they balance exposition with the caring about characters far better. I haven't rewatched Avatar since many, many years. So my memories of it are vague, but I do kind of remember enough to agree with you.
Yeah. But also you watched it as a kid, so that's very different.
Well, like junior high age, like middle school age. So maybe a little older than the intended audience. But even so, I was already like seeking out more challenging topics, and that show quickly delivered.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to talk about Vampire Diaries and Supernatural. You've seen Supernatural?
I've seen most of season 1.
Yeah, Supernatural obviously has some amazing episodes, has some great arcs, some great seasons later on. I haven't seen all of it because it's never ending. But
no, it is. It's ending.
I don't believe it. But the pilot is, again, one of those ones where you kind of have to take people's word for it becoming a better show, because it is so cheesy, so goofy. It's like trying to be scary and failing really badly. There's like a lot of ham-fisted exposition and like, oh, we're grim and we're gonna tell you how serious this topic is, blah blah. Like, it's not atrocious, but it creates a world that I think is a lot more campy than Supernatural ends up being, when it's hard to. So obviously, Supernatural can be silly.
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure it's known for some of its silliness.
Yeah, it can be silly and it can be comedic, but I think that that's when it's trying to be. Like, it gets to a point where it knows this is a comedic episode or this is a comedic moment, and you can tell when they're aiming for it and when they're aiming for seriousness. And I feel like this pilot is not aiming to be campy, maybe slightly, but certainly not like silly. And it's trying to be serious, and I think that it fails in that. It does set up the world, it does set up the characters. It's not like a really bad pilot, but it doesn't engender an idea that this is anything other than like trash TV.
It came off as very generic to me, and I was very confused as to how people made it. And everyone was just like, just go through it, just you'll be there, you'll get it. And I was like, I didn't.
I'm sad that you never got there, because there's some great seasons and
maybe
great
someday.
Episodes. Yeah. It's a good one. It's a good one, guys.
All right, what about Vampire Diaries? The thing I have zero experience with.
Oh my god. So the pilot of Vampire Diaries has such a bad pilot that I would say that there's probably a good amount of people who never got past what the pilot and the promos for the pilot presented.
The promos were enough to be like, what is this?
Yeah, because it 100% was, oh, Twilight's popular, let's do Twilight.
Yeah.
Obviously, the books, I believe, predated at least the Twilight movies, maybe the Twilight books. But obviously, they were like, okay, how do we capitalize on this phenomenon? And so it was much more romance heavy, much more like, oh, I'm a silly teen girl, much more, I'm writing in my diary and blah, blah, blah. And, just very pretty boy vampire, all that stuff. No real grit to it. And even halfway through season 1, you start to realize, oh, there's significant violence here. There's significant darkness here. This isn't just about the romance. There's some intense mythology, some intense villains, and all sorts of stuff like that. But the pilot definitely paints a picture that is quite silly. There's magical mist happening, lots of fog from the vampires.
So from what I remember you telling me, there are things that are like never introduced again, right?
Or they might have been like jokingly referenced again, like 1 or 2 times, but like
never taken seriously.
Yeah, never taken seriously. There's the whole thing with, I don't even know if they're supposed to become ravens or they control ravens or ravens like follow them around or something. It's just a lot of silliness.
I'll be honest, when you told me you watched Vampire Diaries, because my experience with promos before the show started, like that's when I was paying attention to it. I was like, what is this man into?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and there's such a hardcore fan base that I bet it's like hard for the people in that fan base to realize how some people might still see the show. But yeah, I mean, it really felt for so long like, oh, you know, this is, if you're not in it, this is the Twilight show. This transitions nicely with another CW pilot that has similar problems, which is The 100.
Which we're obviously fans of.
Yes.
Hashtag The 100 podcast.
Yeah. Which again, I feel like was trying to go off of the Hunger Games, you know, sort of fervor of that time. And, you know, was very romance focused with the Finn stuff, was a lot more cheesy.
Weird narration.
Yeah. You know, had the sparkly thing. I guess the sparkly butterflies were a few episodes later. But like, you know, it was just the "we're back bitches" line.
Oh, God.
Using Radioactive as like the super poppy popular song.
So bad.
Yeah.
And later on the show like references these cheesy things too and does it better and is like cute about it because it's like, how did anyone make it through? Like that's just like the network sticking its dirty fingers into a show that was not going to be this pop and cheerful.
And the thing is, there are certainly glimmers of what makes the show great in the long term, as far as specifically, I have to say, from the adult side of things in this episode, that show like, oh, there's a little bit something here. But I think it's very interesting watching Vampire Diaries and The 100, and that I think for both of them around like episodes 4, it's like, holy shit, you did that? I didn't know you could do that on this show.
Yeah.
Like, and it kind of just sort of resets your expectations of what the show is trying to be.
Yeah.
And,
but specifically with the pilot and our issues with it are basically like the characters aren't really coming off in the same way as they do even an episode later. Yeah. And there's just too much exposition and world building to actually develop them.
Clark is not very likable. I don't feel. I think like she's kind of annoying because you haven't seen how capable she is yet. I don't think that most of the actors do a great job.
Yeah, I wasn't super impressed with like Bellamy either.
I think I liked Bellamy more. Like I think he was one of the better parts of the pilot.
But I remember just being like, okay, a little confused by him.
Yeah.
So I think it was just this thing of, again, because you'd seen it when I was watching, I was like, why is this guy recommending so many CW shows to me?
Yeah.
This is not good.
Yeah, it comes back to that core thing of like, recommending and sort of the embarrassment of like, you know, if I talk to a new friend and I go, oh, I do a podcast on the 100, they're like, oh, should I check it out? I'm like, yeah, but get like 5 episodes in.
Yeah, I've said that so many times.
Before you judge me.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so that's pretty much it. Let us know what pilots you think are not very indicative of the show's quality going forward.
Or the opposite.
Yes.
That are far better than what the show deserves.
Yes. And check out the rest of our topics that we did for what we watched this week. We're going to put those in the end card at the end of the video. Also, if you want us to do, put out the audio podcast, get a more specific schedule, all that sort of stuff for what we watch, let us know in the comments below. We're kind of experimenting with this format, figuring out what we're doing with the channel. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you're doing okay.
Bye.